we can do something about this. 7 years ago, people said you won't stop fracking in the UK. It's now 6 years since the moratorium was lifted in this country, and there hasn't yet been another frack in this country. And unfortunately, we are on the brink of possibly the well at Preston New Road being fracked. But if they do, even if they do, and hopefully it'll go wrong, but even if they do, that'll still be the only frack this side of 2020. The anti-fracking community, I believe, is the nursery for 5G. Because the anti-fracking community has been built on a model that the establishment have no idea how to deal with. And this is not establishing an NGO, it's building local community groups. So right around the country now we have well over 1,000 local community groups, all working autonomously, independently, but they are networked through social media. But they are working within their community to prevent the unconventional gas industry from becoming established. Now, by comparison, stopping fracking was easy compared to 5G. Mark isn't actually gagged just yet, but he's due in court on Monday, where Gateshead Council are seeking an injunction, effectively a gagging order, and also preventing him from making any contact with people in the local authority because of the information he's trying to share. Now this is bordering on fixated threat. Now we don't know very much about fixated threat in this country, even though we've had a fixated threat commission since 2003. But in Australia, the fixated threat has been used to forcibly medicate a former executive of AGL, one of the unconventional gas companies in Australia, that has caused tremendous damage in the eastern states of Australia. And because, of course, she is a former executive with AGL, then clearly what she has to share has some impact. So the Australian government have identified her as having a fixated threat and have effectively sectioned her and subjected her to forcible medication. And don't think for one moment that this isn't ultimately the game plan here. The policy for what we are seeing being rolled out here was established in 1932. And it's in print, it's a document called Technocracy Inc., written by Howard Scott and a gentleman by the name of Marion King Hubbard, who some may or know from his other revelation about peak oil in 1947, which was introduced to effectively create artificial scarcity of hydrocarbons to encourage people to pay more for them. So we always see the same players cropping up. But they wrote a document in 1932 called Technocracy Inc., which effectively spells out their vision for total control. What they had in 1932 was the vision, what they didn't have was the technology. Now they have the technology. If you can't locate a copy of Technocracy Inc., then you will be able to locate a copy of Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, written in 1969, published in 1970, called Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technocratic Era. He wrote that nearly 30 years after Technocracy Inc. What he did was updated it, and effectively that is still the model for the global control grid. And in that book, Brzezinski makes the observation, he says, humanity will be effectively controlled by technocrats, and I quote, who are not constrained by traditional liberal values. In other words, they'll do whatever it is that they feel they need to do to establish their total control grid, which is a corporate control grid. And because corporatocracy is driven by profit for a few, you'll notice that there's one thing we haven't heard too much about tonight, and that's ethics. Because the corporatocracy does not want ethics to get in the way of its quest for maximizing profit for a very small number of people. And what I was able to prove in the courts just a few weeks ago in Manchester, where I was challenging the attempt by Quadrilla to establish an injunction against any effective protest. And I knew that I was going to lose the case because I knew exactly what case law the judge was going to hide behind. But what I wanted to be able to demonstrate was that parliamentary law in this country is totally subordinated to corporate law. So parliamentary law only effectively exists whilst it protects the corporations, whilst it protects commerce. The moment that commerce, the corporations, believe that criminal law no longer protects them, then they can go to the courts and get an injunction to prevent any opposition. And that injunction is in place right now, effectively prevents any form of protest which causes Quadrilla to lose money. And if that is the case, it doesn't even need someone to be charged with a criminal act. But if Quadrilla feel that somebody has taken an action which has cost them money, then they can go to the civil courts with the evidence and effectively get compensation from that individual. And if that individual hasn't got the means to provide them with the financial compensation, then they're at risk of losing their liberty. So obstructing the highway, which carries a maximum fine up to £1,000, so somebody feels that they want to exercise their protest by walking in front of a truck, then the risk, the maximum risk that they have is being found guilty of obstruction of the highway and up to £1,000 fine, which is rarely administered. But now you could lose your liberty, and this is what the corporations are able to achieve. So we are in a situation right now where humanity is not just under attack, but humanity is being blatantly and flagrantly treated with absolute contempt. And the phone masts are a classic example of that contempt. Because 2 years ago, the legislation was changed via statutory instrument, which I won't bore you with the detail of, but it's a way of changing law without it going through Parliament. But the statutory instrument was introduced to amend the planning laws so that phone masts are now permitted development. In other words, a phone mast can be put up wherever the phone companies feel they want to put up the mast. And with 5G, as you've heard here, the phone masts have to be on a grid of an absolute maximum of every 300 meters. So we are not just looking at 50,000 phone masts that we have around the country right now. It's going to be well over 1 million. And that's why they're targeting the cities first. And the permitted development allows them to replace the existing phone masts, because up to 2016, the maximum height of a phone mast could be 15 meters. Now it can be 25 meters without any planning permission. And that's on unprotected land. In other words, anything that isn't effectively like a national park or an area of special scientific interest, where they can still put a phone mast, but it has to be, I think it's below 15 meters. But what we're going to be seeing, of course, is these phone masts being heightened in readiness for 5G, which is being planned to be rolled out not just in the UK, but globally in 2020. So earlier this year, for the first time, we were able to establish the very, very clear link between the tree removal program in Sheffield and the rollout of 5G. And it doesn't take too many, building blocks to get the link. Some have been mentioned tonight. First of all, Amy, which is the Spanish company that has the contract to remove 17,500 trees from the city of Sheffield, is a partner with Telefonica, which is known as O2 in this country. And they have the contract for setting up the basic 5G grid in the north of England. And if you were ever in any doubt about the issue of trees, then look no further than the promo video that Bournemouth City Council put out, talking about the work that they were doing with Ordnance Survey and with consultants to seek out the best location for the 5G transmitters. And in that video, they actually acknowledged that even hanging baskets have a negative impact on the 5G signal. And the document that Mark referred to, this is the University of Surrey document, which is from the University of Surrey's Centre of 5G Excellence, a bit of a contradiction of terms there, but which is an academic body working in conjunction with industry. And in that white paper, which you can find very easily, just put in University of Surrey 5G and trees, and what you'll find is that section 3.1 of that white paper spells out the negative effect that trees and foliage have on the 5G signal. Now, it's not the trees per se, or the foliage per se, it's the moisture within the trees and the foliage. Because what this document acknowledges is that basically the trees are a problem, trees in foliage are a double problem, trees in foliage with rain on them are a total nightmare, which caused the 5G network to effectively shut down. So the problem is the moisture, the problem is the water. And what are we made of? Right, this is an attack on humanity. Now there's multiple attacks going on, too many to list here. You know, and not everybody is affected in the same way by every element of this attack, this assault on humanity. And basically, the establishment know that with the advancement of artificial intelligence, the number of people needed in employment over the next 15, 20, 40 and more years is going to reduce dramatically. There may be new jobs emerge, but the forecasts show, the economic forecasts show that the number of people in employment is going to be greatly reduced from what we have today. So consequently, unless people are contributing directly to the corporatocracy, they are effectively an unnecessary liability in the mindset of these socio-psychopaths. So consequently, if some people get sick because they're not able to survive in a high EMF environment or a high methane content environment, any kind of toxicity, then that's just unfortunate because they are collateral damage. And what the corporatocracy wants is just those who are able to survive in this toxic environment and those who are effectively willing to be slaves to the corporations. The rest, if they fall by the wayside, that's just unfortunate. And if you think that this isn't what's coming, then look no further than the reports that are emerging in the mainstream media. Earlier this year, it was acknowledged that there was an 11.3 increase in the number of deaths in the first 16 weeks of this year over the average for the same period over the last 5 years. And it's not the usual suspects. It's not people in their 60s, 70s and older. It's people in their 20s, 30s and 40s that are dying. There's no explanation. The government has said it's going to set up a study. We are going to see an increase in the death rates. And that's exactly what the establishment wants. And they work on the basis that they can get away with this because no one's really going to pick up on it, and those that do can just be dismissed as rampant conspiracy theorists. This is what they rely on, shutting down the discussion, shutting down the debate. It's why they're trying to shut down the social media. because they know that fewer and fewer people are now deriving their worldview from a single source, and certainly not from the mainstream media. And people are using their own discretion and discernment to determine what they perceive to be truth. And that's not necessarily correlating with the output from the mainstream media. And the establishment knows this, which is why they're also making the attack on social media. So we have an enormous challenge, but we also have a tremendous opportunity. And that opportunity is to reconnect within communities. And this is what I see happening within the anti-fracking communities all around the country. You know, where it's meetings like this. And especially when an area is specifically targeted. So right now I'm spending a lot of time up in North Nottinghamshire. We had a very, very successful campaign in North Yorkshire last year where we prevented North Yorkshire from being subjected to the first frack in this country. Now I'm in North Nottinghamshire where we're trying to raise awareness within the communities in Lincolnshire, North Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire and South Yorkshire, with some considerable success, but it's done the traditional way, you know, through flyers, through the letterboxes, through knocking on people's doors and talking to them and asking if they know what's going on. And when a rig rocks up, then it's amazing how all the seeds that have been planted then start to germinate and people really start to take an interest. And you know what you have down here in the situation at Park School, where my youngest son attended before he went to Steiner and now to Kevics. But what you have here is an opportunity to really start planting the seeds as to why that foam mass is a problem. And although it may seem like, you know, it's going to be tough going, we don't have very long because the rollout for 5G is scheduled for 2020. So we have to use whatever social networks we have in place today and also look to obviously expand them. Because when 5G hits, it's not just going to be a few target areas around the north of England and a few in the southeast, which fracking is targeting right now. This is going to be nationwide. And whereas fracking is targeting the rural areas first, 5G is going to target the urban areas first, and then it will be rolled out into the rural parts of the country. So it's really important that, you know, the work of Mark Steele, who's an inventor and an engineer and has a lot of experience of EMF technology, and Graham Downing, because these guys, you know, they have a proven track record within the sphere of science. And, you know, they're not going to rely on conjecture or hearsay. They are looking at the documented evidence. And one of the common denominators is that any report that you see coming out of academia on 5G frequencies have one thing in common. They all call for a moratorium until the technology has been properly tried and tested. But what is happening is we are seeing the traditions of democracy just ridden roughshod right over. The only reason democracy is allowed to exist at the moment is because it's not getting in the way of the corporatocracy. As soon as it does get in the way of corporatocracy, then we see how the corporations try to lobby to get changes made to the processes so that then they can just sort of ride roughshod, which is obviously where this permitted development comes in. So it's great that John and Jason have established this meeting here in Totnes, and hopefully something will, you know, grow out of this, an awareness, because let me tell you that although this area is not targeted for fracking, the local anti-fracking community have been very, very supportive of the wider campaign. And it's thanks to the local anti-fracking community lobbying Sarah Wollaston that in March of this year, Sarah Wollaston asked Claire Perry, the Minister of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, some very, very poignant questions regarding the fracking process. And the responses that Sarah Wollaston got from Claire Perry gave the anti-fracking community enormous ammunition to use elsewhere in the country. So just because an area isn't targeted, and Totnes may not necessarily be right at the top of the list, but nonetheless, the people of Totnes can make an enormous difference. So thank you so much for setting up tonight.